because the people in the middle won't let the top guy know what's really going on down below. And this is why people wave the flag, but they don't perform anymore, you see. So these are things that I learned the hard way and that you have to be alert to. And so the question becomes, how do you run an Audubon society so that it's a functional, civilizational movement, alerting the public to ecological realities? And so I have just a few suggestions from my own experience. And one of them, for example, that if there's somebody leaves you a really big gift of several $1 million, you would probably be better off, and you need to think about this if it happens, to spin off another organization to do part of the job instead of letting one organization try to be everything to everybody else. So if you're lucky to acquire a lot of money, put it to work in different ways, and that way you won't succumb to the problems of bureaucratic excesses, you see. And of course, my suggestion, based on the hopes I have for the future, is that your organization, which is one of the old-timers, one of the leaders, one of the survivors of the Audubon movement, since you're in the smaller state, it would be wonderful if you become leaders in the experiment of downsizing society. We're going to have to downsize the corporation so that it does not dominate government. Corporations are too big and too rich, so they bribe their way. And it means that we lose the democratic interchange that is a way of improving our circumstances in general. So if this is a proper challenge, that there are too many making too many demands, we're going to have to reduce our numbers gently, but not wait another generation or two. You see, we've got to tackle the task, and we've got to convince one another that we're all in the same boat, and we're going to capsize if we don't trim the sail, if you will. And by the way, unfortunately, the economists at the universities are not much help in this. They think that growth is a necessity for perpetuating the economy. But Herman Daly, who's a pretty good economist himself, has written 2 books on that, one of them called Steady State Economics. And so we know the answers to these problems. It's a question of how do we fit them in to our particular circumstances. Becoming more efficient, for example, will be helpful because it buys time. But it's not enough. Growth has buried our mistakes. Everybody loves growth because it allows you to say, look, we may have made some mistakes along the way, but look, things are getting better all the time. But now we see the handwriting on the wall, and things are pretty good for some of us, but in general, everybody is threatened by the circumstances that we have created. So the challenge of the future is to refocus, not on quantity, but on quality. There is so much scope for improving the human condition. We've got to learn to create a psycho-friendly environment for everybody. Because if we don't feel comfortable with the environment and its promise for tomorrow, we know that we become paranoid. We exaggerate problems in one hand and we neglect them on another hand. So you need a representative board of directors such as you've been fortunate to have in the past. Not too many lawyers, not too many businessmen, some of each. Reach out to the different groups who also need to be involved in thinking about these problems of our day. You might, for example, copy the National Audubon Society's early commitment to understanding what we're up against. And John Baker, who was president when I joined the society 50 years ago or thereabouts, knew that he didn't have the staff to address all these problems, so they gave university fellowships to study the needs of endangered species, for example. The first one was on the ivory-billed woodpecker, the California condor, and so forth. So you can do that for a few $1,000s. You can get young thinkers to address the parameters of the problems and tell you how better to address them. I gave a small fellowship like that when I was at National to a young woman who was working in economics, and she gave us a lovely paper on the importance of Audubon sanctuaries. Audubon is really doing the work of the nation. If we were a better balanced society, understood our problems, the legislators would support this Audubon Society because they know it's nice to have a friendly critic on the sidelines watching how we perform. One of my daughters is a public health official in Canada, and they're on to that. The federal government subsidizes with an annual contribution a small NGO that my daughter heads to dog watch federal programs on public health, to tell the government where they're falling behind and where they need to press. And by the way, she tells me that Canada is now way ahead of us on public health because we've not financed our own programs adequately in recent years. And you should be focused on bringing nature back into the city. We have changed the environment so much and our people are so concentrated that we're going to have to bring it back to them. So that every city block, for example, ought to have one lot devoted to a tiny pocket park, if you will, where the little kids and the older people can get together and watch the plants grow and watch the butterflies and other things and get a sense of belonging to nature. We were created by this system, and now the system is dependent on us. So birds have always been a miner's canary. The old miners carried canaries with them. That was the only way to detect gases in the underground tunnels. So birds have served us for that long time as an alert to what we're doing to the environment. And now birds are dependent on how we're going to manage the planet because we have become the dominant species and we've been heedless of the balance for too many years. So that's my message. I hope it's helpful to have this kind of reminder. And if you want to argue with me, I have an email I can give you. Because, as I say, we all see it differently. Each of us is different in makeup, therefore we have different antennae on the world. Each of us interpret what we think we apprehend, and we apprehend only part of the total reality, you see. And that's what we haven't learned yet. We don't have our sensorium, our senses are coarse-grained. The real nature is fine-grained out there, dealing with the atoms and the molecules and so forth. But now we're catching on to the fact that we have been heedless. We've been premature in almost all our conclusions about reality But now, because nature is tapping us on the shoulder and say, hey, you're pushing too hard, now we're going to have to rethink. And it ought to be more fun to rethink than it was to get into this mess. So thank you very much.